Smarter. There are places around the table. Come and fill the places, maybe not. If the speakers are not here.
Sorry for the noise. I don't know where it's coming from because my switch off.
No pieces are dated. The language card, Polish cards. It was Spanish with French, Russian and Japanese, French and Romanian.
Are we all set?
Lower the volume.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the session of Human Rights Council and specifically Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane and Degrading Treatment and Punishment. As you know, 31 years have passed since the United Nations Convention Against Tortures entered into force. The Convention has inspired new national laws, helped put in place important protection mechanisms around the world, and raised awareness about the needs and rights of victims. Yet, as we saw it in our previous session this morning, torture continues across the world, and we had numerous examples today. And there are devastating impacts on people and societies alike. People need to be able to trust their institution of justice. Governments need to protect human rights instead of oppressing people. And that's what we discussed this morning again. We carry on with the discussion. We have more reports, country reports, which we welcome from participants of this afternoon session. We'll start with the Secretary General of the organization, Human Rights Organization, and it's against tortures. That's or a continuation of tortures. So it's next speaker. We have on video recording.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start by thanking you for the opportunity to address you today. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you in person, but thanks to technology, I can still join in this important conference today. I am joining you via video link from Donbas, eastern Ukraine, where we have been investigating allegations of execution-style killings of Ukrainian soldiers by pro-Russian armed groups. But let me start my speech. Sadly, its topic is just as difficult. Electric shocks, beatings, rape, humiliations, mock executions, burnings, sleep deprivation, water torture, long hours in contorted positions, use of drugs and dogs. The very words sound like the stuff of nightmares. But every day and across every region of the world, these unimaginable horrors are the reality for countless men, women, and children. Torture is abhorrent. It is barbaric and inhumane. It can never be justified. It is wrong, self-defeating, and poisons the rule of law, replacing it with terror. No one is safe when governments allow its use. The world's governments recognized these fundamental truths when, in the aftermath of the atrocities of the Second World War, they adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. This enshrined the basic right of all of us everywhere to live free from torture, free from cruelty. This right, at the heart of our shared humanity, was later enshrined in a legally binding international agreement through an explicit and absolute prohibition against torture and other ill treatment in the 1966 International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. 30 years ago last year, this progress was further built upon by the UN Convention Against Torture. The convention was groundbreaking. It offered a set of concrete steps to make the global ban on torture reality. By establishing a set of measures enshrined in law and specifically designed to prevent torture, punish perpetrators, and ensure justice and redress to victims. These measures intend not only to end torture and other ill treatment nationally, but also to ensure that no one is deported across borders to be tortured, and that there is no safe haven for perpetrators. Torturers are now international outlaws. A robust legal framework has been built up, and 155 countries are state parties to the UN Convention. This is real and meaningful progress. But many governments are betraying their responsibility. More than 3 decades on from the Convention, and more than 65 years after the Universal Declaration, torture is not just alive and well, it is flourishing. The outrageous extent of torture today exposes the gulf between what promises governments made more than 30 years ago and what governments do today. Over the past years, Human Rights Now has reported on torture and other ill treatments in 141 countries and from every world region. While in some of these countries, Human Rights Now has only documented isolated and exceptional cases, in others torture is systemic. But even one case of torture or other ill treatment is unacceptable. this figure gives a sense of the scale of the problem. But we can only report on those cases known to us. By no means do they reflect the full extent of torture in the world. Nor do they begin to describe the despicable reality of torture or the true cost of lost and ruined lives. Torture is a favorite tool of the forces of repression, but its use is not restricted to tyrants and dictators, even if it is prevalent under such regimes. Nor is it the preserve of the secret police. While many states have taken the universal prohibition seriously and made significant strides in combating torture, governments across the political spectrum and from every continent still collude in this ultimate corruption of humanity, using torture to extract information, force confessions, silence dissent, or simply as a cruel punishment. Alarmingly, a new global poll commissioned by Human Rights Now reveals that 30 years after the UN Convention, almost half of the world's population still do not feel safe from this horrific abuse. Although governments have prohibited this dehumanizing practice in law and have recognized global disgust at its existence, many of them are carrying out torture or facilitating it in practice. The political failure by governments is compounded and fueled by a corrosive state of denial. Those who order or commit torture usually escape justice. Torture is mostly carried out with impunity, with no investigation and no one prosecuted. Rather than respecting the rule of law through zero tolerance of torture, governments persistently and routinely lie about it to their own people and to the world. Rather than ensuring effective safeguards to protect their citizens from the torturer, instead they allow torture to thrive. The pervasive and pernicious nature of this abuse demonstrates that a global ban is simply not enough. Our worldwide poll also shows that the overwhelming majority of people want clear rules against torture. Such rules and other safeguards could prevent and ultimately bring an end to torture. Double standards on torture must be tackled head on. Impunity must end. For more than 50 years, Human Rights Now has been fighting to stamp out one of the most insidious acts one human being can perpetrate against another. 30 years ago, our movement led the campaign to secure the UN Convention Against Torture. Now we are launching a worldwide Stop Torture campaign to get that promise fulfilled. This latest campaign is a rallying call to stop torture, and we can, if all of us, from those on the streets to heads of state, stand between the tortured and the torturer. Human Rights Now is mobilizing across the world to end torture. We will target governments, demonstrate and expose the brutality of this noxious abuse. We will stand alongside those who bravely defend others against torture. Together we will intervene whenever people are tortured. We will hold torturers to account. Torture survivors will know they are not forgotten and not alone. Combating torture is part of our history. It is our legacy, and until the final torture chamber closes for business, it is our future. I hope you will help us.
Thank you very much for your powerful presentation and for your call. And we would like to reinforce that universal ratification and full implementation of the Convention must remain our imperative. General Secretary of the United Nations fully supports the Convention Against Torture initiative to achieve universal ratification all over the world by all countries, and we aim to do that in 10 years' time. I would like also to update that now we have 156 states which are parties to the convention, and this number is growing. But we need to move to our next speaker, and this will be Mustafa Dzhemilev, and so we will stay in Ukraine, and now we will talk about Crimean Tatars. Over to you.
Honorable Chairman, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Honorable Chairman, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mustafa Dzhemilev. My people call me Kirymoglu, which means the son of Crimea. I am the ex-chairman of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people, but as you know, I'm not allowed in Crimea now. I was born in Crimea, and when I was 6 months old, in 1944, my family and thousands of others were deported from our homeland and sent thousands of kilometers away by the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. All my people were deported en masse, kicked out of our land, and sent to a vast, inhospitable desert. Half of the Crimean Tatars died on the way. Half. 1 in every 2 members of a single nation vanished in a few months. Forgive me for saying this. Not even the Jewish people suffered such a loss during the Holocaust. I grew up in what today is known as the Republic of Uzbekistan. I lived most of my life in Central Asia. We were only allowed to return to our lands in the last days of the Soviet Union during Mikhail Gorbachev's time. Tatars. The struggle I was imprisoned and tortured many times. This theory ultimately make me and all my countrymen give up. But neither I nor my people ever gave up. But today I'm not here to talk about my history. Today I'm here to speak about the grave abuses and excesses suffered by my people and other citizens of Crimea in the last 13 months since Russia invaded, occupied, and illegally annexed the peninsula. Since March 2014, people have been abducted and disappeared without trace. Nobody save the perpetrators knows what happened to them. Making political opponents disappear is a very old strategy that authoritarian but fragile governments resort to. It gives the pretense that everything is normal and nothing is wrong, making it very difficult to denounce crime. We have been through this in the past, during the Soviet Union, but we are also concerned about the future, because we remember what happened in Chechnya after the war. At least 5,000 people disappeared there, a fact that has been acknowledged by the European Court of Human Rights on several occasions. Now, let me take us through a particular case, the one of Reshat Akhmetov. He was kidnapped on the 3rd of March in 2014 while attending a peaceful demonstration in Simferopol against the annexation of Crimea. His body was later found dumped in a forest with clear signs of torture. He was 39 and the father of 3 children. His family were only allowed to see the body once to identify him. The authorities are not investigating this crime or any of the others. Pro-Russian forces wearing no insignias have also abducted Ukrainian activists and tortured them for days before kicking them out of the peninsula. We have reasons to believe that they are soldiers of the Russian army under specific orders. There are many other cases. Ladies and gentlemen, please do not ignore the elephant in the room. There is a terror regime in Crimea. Whoever denies it is a liar or is misinformed. Anyone who disagrees with the status quo in Crimea is encouraged to leave and never return. The persuasion methods are kidnapping, harassment, torture, and even murder. The Russian authorities want us to shut up. They have closed Tatar TV channels, forced human rights organizations to stop their work, and even silenced any criticism on the internet. They want us to disappear, to become a footnote in history. They want us to renounce everything that makes us what we are. We will not. Ladies and gentlemen, I have fought all my life for the rights of my people. I went through hell so that my children and grandchildren could live in our ancestral land without fear. Do not let it fall in vain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mustafa, for your appeal. This will be considered as part of the report on Ukraine and will be added in this report. Thank you very much. It will be just an addition, and we will discuss this further down, further later today. Our next presentation will be done. Will be conducted by Tatars consecutively, and this Rafiqul Islam. I'm talking about New Zealand government shares intelligence with state security forces in Bangladesh. If the interpreters are ready, I will pass on to our speaker. Over to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Rafiqul Islam, and I am the brother of Aminul Islam, whose tortured body was found in the outskirts of Dhaka on the 5th of April in 2012. He was found with wounds from waist to foot, which had been made with some kind of sharp object, and his toes and his ankles were smashed. His body was battered and bruised. What crime had he committed to deserve this treatment? Well, in fact, the only crime he had committed was to defend the human rights of workers in Bangladesh. My brother was a labour activist. He worked his entire life to improve working conditions and pay for people in an industry which supplies clothes to companies like Walmart, Tommy Hilfiger, H&M, and Ralph Lauren. He organised protests, and he helped ABC News to speak to the survivors of the fire in the factory in Bangladesh, which I'm sure some of you will have heard about on the news. And I'm sure that you are all also aware of the working conditions of garment manufacturers in Bangladesh and in other countries, even if it doesn't seem to stop you from buying their clothes. Unfortunately, this is what we have come to expect from countries such as Bangladesh. But this is not what I want to talk about today. I do not want to talk about Bangladesh. I want to talk, in fact, about New Zealand. Now you may ask, what does New Zealand have to do with my brother's death? Well, the official line on my brother's murder is that he died in so-called unexplained circumstances. But what we do know is that in 2010, he was arrested by the NSI, the National Security Intelligence Agency, who he accused of torturing him and threatening his life. Well, it's not a huge stretch of the imagination to work out who the suspects are for his death 2 years later. And now, thanks to Edward Snowden, new reports have come to light. These have been published in the New Zealand Herald and in the American newspaper The Intercept, and the content is alarming, to say the least. They suggest, in fact, they state, the reports that were published, that the Bangladeshi security forces and the GCSB in New Zealand, which is the Government Communications Security Bureau in charge of intelligence in New Zealand, it suggests that they have been in contact, that they have been sharing information, and in both directions. That's very important. Now, I do not have time to go into everything which was published. There is a huge amount of information, and you can see it all if you go and read the articles. But one line really stood out for me, and that was, and I quote, GCSB's Bangladesh counter-terrorism reporting has provided unique intelligence leads that have enabled successful counter-terrorism operations by the Bangladeshi State Intelligence Service. Now, it is true that the report does not state exactly which agencies received this intelligence, but the fact is that there is not one intelligence agency in Bangladesh which could be considered to be innocent when it comes to human rights abuses. It is a fact that human rights groups for years have been reporting on the intelligence and security agencies in Bangladesh and their complete disregard for international regulations regarding torture. All three agencies have been accused of human rights abuses, of politically motivated killings, and extrajudicial killings. And it's not just the intelligence agencies. The police and these agencies work very closely together. And in fact, there exists a task force interrogation cell in Bangladesh. And this is where police and intelligence agencies work together. It has been described by the Guardian newspaper as a torture centre designed to extract information and confessions from so-called enemies of the state. One British man, in 2009, was allegedly strapped to a chair with a hood placed over his head, and a drill was driven into his shoulder and his hip. There are more examples: burning with acid, hammering of nails into toes and fingers, electric shocks, ice torture. The list goes on, and I cannot go into all of them. But I would like to bring the focus back to New Zealand. New Zealand, a developed nation, a democracy, a country very often held up as a paragon of virtue when it comes to equality. They were one of the first countries to give women the vote, for example. And New Zealand has been sharing intelligence with the same agencies who are almost certainly responsible for my brother's death, along with who knows how many others. Now, call me cynical, but I'm sure that in the post-9/11 world in which we live, many countries would love to be able to torture people to get information about potential terror attacks. And quite rightly, there are international regulations which prevent this. And I can also see that it might be very convenient for a country to be able to share information with another country which does not have the same regard for these international regulations. Now, far be it from me to imply that anything of the kind has been going on, but you have to admit that it doesn't look very good. It seems to me that if we want to continue to call this the United Nations, then all nations must unite against torture in any country. And those countries with a good track record must hold the others to account. I call upon New Zealand to set an example. You need to accept your role, however indirect, in my brother's death, and you must make a commitment that you will no longer share intelligence information with agencies which you know have been responsible for such appalling abuses of people's basic human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rafiqul, for your presentation, for your report. We are taking a short pause now for 20 minutes or 25 minutes, and we meet here in this room at 3:30. Thank you. photographers please get ready, we'll start in a minute. Yes, are we all ready to start? Good. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I imagine you had a very good discussion of the situation with particular delegations represented here today at the meeting. We have two more reports today this afternoon, one from North Korea and the second one from Spain. And we will have, hopefully we will have some time for questions and debates. Just maybe a brief session on that. So that's the plan for this afternoon. And without any further comments, I think I will just pass on to Yeon-mi Park, talking about North Korea and North Korean refugees.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about my birthplace, because very few people can do it. It is my duty here before you to shed light on how life is in North Korea. My name is Yeon-mi Park, and I was born in 1993 in North Korea. As a child, I thought North Korea was the best country on the planet. I grew up singing a song called Nothing to Envy, and I was very proud. In school, we spent a lot of time studying the history of our leader, but we never learned much about the outside world, except that America, South Korea, and Japan are the enemy. I never heard any story that was not about Kim Jong-il. Every book, every song, everything in the press, every movie it's propaganda to promote the Kim dictators. Life in North Korea is unimaginable. There's only one channel on television. There is no internet. Everything we do is watched by the regime. North Korea is the only country in the world that executes people for making unauthorized international phone calls. Expressing doubts about the greatness of the regime can get three generations of a family imprisoned or executed. We do not have freedom of speech, of movement, or of association. On paper, we have freedom of religion, but you can be executed for reading the Bible. From a very early age, my mother taught me not to even whisper, because mice and birds could hear us. I admit it now, I thought Kim Jong-il could read my mind. I grew up during the famine in the 1990s. My family was not poor, so I never suffered from hunger. But I was a child, and I could see kids in the streets next to my school. They were dying there. But I saw them all the time, every day, and no one told me it wasn't a normal situation. I had no idea how terrible it was. My point of view on the country started changing when I saw a pirated DVD of the movie Titanic. I found out that there were more stories than the ones we heard in our countries. And I realized how violent the regime was when, at the age of 9, I saw my first public execution. It was my friend's mother, her pride, watching a Hollywood movie. I'm lucky I have not been denunciated for watching Titanic, otherwise I would not be here. My father was a member of the Unique Party and worked in the capital, Pyongyang. When Kim Jong-il was unable to provide rations to the nation, he had to stop surveillance on people. So my dad got into illegal trading. When I was 8, he was arrested for trading goods on the black market with China. He was sentenced to 17 years in labor camps. North Korea has never admitted to the horrors of lives in its labor camps, not even to the and the prisoner is publicly executed, generally by shooting or hanging. In some camps, the other prisoners are then forced to mutilate the body. As I said before, according to the North Korean ideology, deviant behaviors are genetic. Therefore, they do not want any deviant prisoner to give birth in the camps. When a pregnant woman arrives in the camp, she endures a forced abortion, or the birth is being provoked. Newborns are then killed. The guards can suffocate them with a wet towel in front of the mother, or the babies are left in a plastic box until they die. After 2 days, if the children are still alive, the guards kill them by breaking their skulls. My father was beaten every day while he was there. They hit him always on the same spot, and he was hurting so much he couldn't walk. He was lucky to be given a brief So my mother and I walked across the border to go to China. We were taken across the border by Chinese smugglers, and one of them told us that he would report us to the authorities if he could not have sexual relationship with me. I was a 13-year-old girl. So we have a saying in North Korea saying, "Women are weak, but mother are strong." My mother did not let him touch me, and she let herself be raped in order to protect me. We then found shelter in the house of a family member in Shenyang. When we arrived there, we were stateless and destitute. But most of all, we were afraid to be discovered and sent back to North Korea. We could not leave the house. We could not even turn the lights on. China sends North Korean refugees back to North Korea, where they're all sent to the camps or executed before even going to the camps. The torture includes having nails hammered into the back, having boiling hot water poured on the skin, being forced to drink lots of water in a very little time. And these torture are not only done in the labor camps, but also during interrogations by the police, which can happen at any time, for any reason. My father died while we were in China. We could not cry because we were afraid to be discovered. Our main concern was what to do with the body. We could not even organize a funeral. Being a North Korean deserter, you have no right to a proper death. So we paid 2 people to help carry his body. I went with them at 3 in the morning while everyone was asleep, and I buried him in the mountain in secret. I was 14 years old. After the funeral, we took a bus for 2 days to go to Qingdao, where Chinese and South Korean Christian missionaries helped refugees in a shelter. They advised us to flee from Mongolia. My mother and I had to walk for 24 hours straight through the Gobi Desert to get to Mongolia. It was the winter and it was minus 40 degrees. We only had a compass, and when it broke, we followed the stars. We arrived in Mongolia, where guard told us they would send us back to China. Armed with knives, we threatened to kill ourselves. We wanted to live as dignified humans. We eventually managed to seek asylum at the South Korean embassy in Mongolia, and we were flown to Seoul after 2 years of journey. I have now been living in Seoul for 5 years, but I'm still adjusting. It feels weird to see all these lights at night when we were living in the dark before. I have joined a TV program that mocks North Korea's regime, also writing a newspaper about North Korean issues. It's dangerous. Some people have received threats, but everyone needs to know what life really is like there. I was advised to change my name so that the regime could not find me here. I don't want to do that. My name is the only heritage I have from my father, who died during our escape from that country. If I die, I will die having experienced freedom, and I will die satisfied of having done something right for the people of North Korea. People often ask me, how can we help North Koreans? Well, there are many ways, but I would like to speak about 3 of them for now. First, you need to educate yourself so you can raise awareness about the human rights crisis in North Korea. Then, you need to bring all the help and support you can to North Korean refugees who are trying to escape that oppressive regime and live free as dignified human beings. Finally, you have to sign a petition for China to stop repatriation. North Korean refugees are treated there as illegal immigrants. There are about 300,000 North Korean refugees in China, and they are vulnerable. 70% of North Korean women and teenage girls are being victimized and even sometimes sold for as little as $200. You might know that North Korea has signed several UN international conventions about respecting fundamental civil and human rights. And in spite of these signatures, North Koreans are denied these fundamental rights every day. The Kim dictators have violated our human rights for more than 7 decades, and no one deserves to live like this. Several organizations, including the UN, can make this problem visible. Fellow delegates, please join me, as together we can make this a global movement to free North Koreans. When I was crossing the Gobi Desert, scared of dying, I felt alone and I thought nobody in this world cared. But you have listened to my story. You care. And thank you very much for that.
I'm Yong-Mi Park. I would like to assure you that the United Nations fully support North Korean refugees and the cause and the issues which you raised in your presentation today. It will be taken on board and will be added to the country report as part of it, and the actions will be taken accordingly. We need to move on, and we have a speaker from Spain, Jose Maria Calante, talking about the Spanish victim of torture.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished delegates, I'm here to speak about impunity in Spain. Situation is like this. Victims insulted and called troublemakers. Criminals protected by the legal system. Judges prosecuted for investigating tortures and murders. This is what Spain has become. My name is Jose Maria Galante, and I have had to go to an Argentinian court to seek justice for crimes that were committed in Spain. Why, you may ask yourselves? Well, let me tell you. Because despite being repeatedly instructed to do so by the United Nations, Spanish authorities refused to investigate any of the multiple and terrible crimes committed during the Civil War and the last dictatorship. I'm talking about Franco's dictatorship that finished 40 years ago almost. They refused on the grounds that there was an amnesty law that forgave all those crimes. They're very well aware that international law establishes that crimes against humanity cannot be pardoned via an amnesty law. They know this, yet they decide to look the other way and instead tell me and thousands of other victims to just shut up, to not be a troublemaker, to be a good boy and just forget. And I can't, ladies and gentlemen. Believe me, I wish I could forget. I wish I would not wake up in the middle of the night remembering the beatings, the humiliation, the agony that I went through. I wish I could leave all of that behind forever. But I cannot. Not unless justice is served. The man that tortured me is called Antonio González Pacheco. He was a member of the Dirección General de Seguridad during the dictatorship. The not-so-secret police. Everybody knew who they are. He has never been punished for his crimes. He lives in one of the best neighborhoods of Madrid, and he does not hide from the police at all. In fact, the cops have never ever disturbed him. But I knew him under a different alias. Billy the Kid, they used to call him. Now, he claims that he has never been known under that name. He hides his past, maybe out of shame. But why was he named Billy the Kid, you may wonder? Well, other members of the secret police gave him that nickname. He was always quick to pull his gun out, to intimidate and sometimes shoot detainees. He gave me the worst beating of my life when I was merely 19 years old. I was detained by the police and interrogated for being a member of the Communist League. The tortures quickly began after the arrest. After 2 days of beating, I had bruises all over my body. I urinated blood. My feet were so swollen that they removed my shoes. At one point, they were scared that I would die there. On the 8th day, they took me to a so-called doctor that examined me, gave me an aspirin, and told them that I was fine, that they could continue. I have only vague memories of the 3 following days and the insufferable torments that I was subject to. But I do remember him. He was a sadist, you know? He actually enjoyed inflicting pain on others. Thanks to an investigation, now we know that he did non-paid overtime with detainees. He loved violence that much. And he was the only member of his unit to do something like this. And we also know that I was not the only one to suffer at his hands. Very far from it. So if tens of people, hundreds of people even, claim to have been tortured, and there are official documents that prove these crimes and that link these people to these crimes that are denounced, why is nobody prosecuting Billy the Kid? As I said, it all goes back to 1977, 2 years after Franco died. In that moment, the Spanish Parliament passed the amnesty law forgiving all crimes of this type committed during the Civil War and afterwards. This is nothing new. Many dictators have done this in the past to try to avoid trial. As I said, international law says that crimes against humanity such as widespread torture cannot be forgiven this way. But the Spanish government, again, refuses to comply. On several occasions, the United Nations has instructed Spain to investigate these crimes. They have always refused. The only judge that had the courage in Spain to try to bring these men to justice was, ironically and sadly, prosecuted and convicted by the Supreme Court in Spain. He's no longer working as a judge. This is the reason why I went to Argentinian courts. Under the system of universal justice, crimes against humanity can be investigated and tried in a different country if the country where they were originally committed is not willing or is unable to investigate them. A curious and interesting fact about all of this is that in Argentina there was also a dictatorship, and that the crimes committed in Argentina were initially investigated in Spain when Argentina refused to investigate them. This judicial process had a profound effect in Argentinian society and promoted a change that has led to the convictions of tens of criminals. It was a wake-up call for Argentinian citizens. My wish and my hope is that the proceedings that we have opened in Argentina will have a similar impact in Spanish society. I and thousands of other victims need this. It has been many years since these terrible events happened, and I think that my fight is beyond the particulars of my case. I think that Spain needs to examine its past and finally stop trying to hide it so that it never happens again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We pass this, your presentation to the legal department for them to investigate what can be done legally and liaising with the Spanish government. I think we continue to, with our consultations with the Spanish government on this matter. We move on to the debate, and we may have something like 7 minutes for questions and answers. And I think there were some questions, some volunteers, some interested to ask questions. So over to you. Question time. Do you have any questions from the delegates today?
I've got a question to Mr. Djemilev.
Yes,
From Crimea. You were talking a lot about your story and survivors of torture in Crimea. Do you have any access to counseling facilities? Do you get any help, like psychological, mental help? Or are the survivors, are the victims of torture?
Thank you very much. This is a very good question. My people, we are Tatars, we do not have any professional counseling service. We have mutual help and mutual support. We support one another. As you know, at the moment, I'm in Ukraine and I'm not allowed to enter Crimea because Crimea is now under illegal jurisdiction of Russia, and I'm unwanted person there, so I'm not allowed to enter Crimea. I cannot be in person with my people now. And in Ukrainian people, you know that they work in Rada of Ukraine. We have mutual support and volunteers, which is not a professional service. It's people-to-people help. It's people-to-people support. We don't know if we do it wrong or if we do it right. We do not know how good or not so good we are. We do what we can. We don't trust, sometimes people do not trust the authorities, and the authorities and the government have lots of work to do. And unfortunately, the needs of the victims of torture is overlooked. So we do it ourselves. We are lacking professional training. We are lacking professional advice. The scale of the problem, the scale of the torture in Ukraine now, and I'm not even sure what's happening in Crimea, it's horrible there. The scale is such that suddenly we have hundreds and hundreds of people who are affected by this problem. And we have no experts ready and prepared to deal with it. So any with medical education, any with big heart, anyone who is next to somebody in need would try and provide support. So I'd like to use this opportunity and maybe address this assembly and appeal to help Ukraine to send professional trainers, people with relevant experience who already work in other countries and gathered some experience how to help victims of torture, survivors of torture, and help us. We will organize training and schools, and we need to train our volunteers, and we need some funds maybe to do this work professional and funded by some sources. So at the moment it's just volunteers movement.
Thank you very much for the question and answer. Any other questions? Yes, please. Comments? Yes, please.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I am Safia Bahi, and I am an expert of the Committee Against Torture, and I just came back from a mission in West Africa. The reason why I'm here today is that I would like to remind you that there's torture in hidden forms. As such, in West Africa, you have torture that is exercised on young children under the name of tradition. For instance, female mutilation that is done on young little girls is considered not as torture, but as a tradition in these countries, such as Guinea, for instance. And I would like the committee to think about the measures that could be undertaken in order to give a new definition to such practices and consider them as torture. Because these young girls who do suffer from female mutilation end up left in very bad and appalling conditions and do suffer and sometimes die from infections, and that is a problem that is to be considered. So I just came back from my mission, and I just wanted to remind you all that torture can also be hidden, but it's not because it is hidden that we should close our eyes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, suggestions? Yes, please.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to talk about terminology today. We've talked about various groups of people who've suffered from torture, but I think the right term is really survivors, torture survivors. Can you really survive torture? And this is a question I'm asking, really. And is this word really appropriate to what we're discussing today? So I don't have the answer to this question, but I think that we've moved from victim to torture survivor, so that's a little bit better already, and there's hope. But, can you actually recover from torture? Can you just be a survivor? What happens to your life afterwards? We talked about resilience this morning. With this form of resilience, how can we transmit it to others? So the key words here, victims is a very negative term. Torture survivor is, I think, much more encouraging. But is there a word we could use that really highlights the value of resilience and hope?
Do you think torture survivor gives hope? Does it have positive connotation, because we don't know whether this survivor is happy, whether the survivor actually comes back to life and can deal with everything? That's a big question. And I think we need to look into this. What we will be doing, we will be passing this report and what is being discussed in this committee to all member states, to all governments, and we will encourage states to respond promptly to the recommendations made today and to the reports we received. And we will expect them to take meaningful steps in the right direction to eradicate torture and meet the needs of those who were traumatized by the tortures, and their families or torture survivors, and we would like to report on what is happening to them, what the governments are doing to bring them back to normal life, because this is crucial. So these are the actions which we will be doing after this meeting. Our next meeting will be with member states representing those governments, and where they will report on the actions made by those governments. Thank you very much for all rapporteurs today and for all interventions. And this meeting is closed now. Thank you.